Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and happy holidays. Enjoy Circle sent me a yo-yo for review. No, they did not pay me to say anything, nor did they send this to me in return for praise or my good word. All thoughts are my own. So, Enjoy Circle sent me the Aurus. This yo-yo's design is sick. I adore this design. This thing's got a very aesthetically pleasing look. The profile, the hub, it's just a very, very nice looking yo-yo. The simple slope hub with the circle and the nipple, the profile is nice from an aesthetic standpoint, and the rims aren't too sharp. The rims are boxy and the proportions of the profile are really nice. The Aurus has a very clean design, and something about it makes it look stout. It's a yo-yo that looks strong. It reminds me a lot of my own yo-yo too, the Aggressor. The profile has a passing similarity, and there's also the nipple style hub, though the Aurus has the ring around the nipple. I love the aesthetic of the Aurus. Now, something to note here, since the cup here is just a straight slope to the middle, but on the other side we have this added slope right here that doesn't follow the angle of the wall, that's added weight, as well as the response bump, which is a bit big. But I'll touch on that response bump later. In all, the Aurus has a 57mm diameter with a 47mm width. It's made with 7075 aluminum and it weighs 68 grams. Side note, it came with a ton of goodies, like 2 bundles of OT string, a bearing, response pads, the whole shebang. Lots of goodies, but those goodies and the design mean very little if it doesn't play well. So, how does it play? Yeah, it plays pretty good. The big thing is that the Aurus is just super powerful. This thing kicks hard. It's got a ton of spin power and it always comes back to the hand with a solid thwack. It's super resilient and can take a pounding when it comes to play. And part of what helps that is that this thing is crazy good for redirects. I think it's the added weight here towards the center from the response bump and this added little slope in the profile. It doesn't have that crazy rim-weighted sensation because this center bit helps to counterbalance it. So it has this really, really nice feeling redirectability. This makes it crazy good for rail combos for its weight. This thing weighs 68 grams. For how well it moves during rail combos, you'd think it weighs 65 grams or less. The Aurus is a really maneuverable yo-yo. It feels great. It can pick up the pace and really get going if you push it to. Naturally, it has a bit more of a slower speed, but I find it not to be super restrictive. The Aurus won't hold you back because of its maneuverability. For horizontals, the Aurus is super good, but I find it flopping back to being vertical rather easily if you mess up. The same thing applies to hitting some hops and pops. And this is where I'm going to cycle back to the response bump. The size of the response bump makes the Aurus flop kind of easily. It's why I haven't mentioned the stability so far. The Aurus is either incredibly stable and withstands some janky play, or you bump into the response bump and it flops the yo-yo. It lives in a state where it's kind of both really stable and not so stable all at once. I think if the response bump wasn't so big and this slope that goes down to the response bump was more pronounced, this issue wouldn't be as present. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that's the culprit. This puts the Aurus in a spot where it's generally good for things like zoning, horizontals, and hop combos, but if you make a bad mistake, it flops. As for play details, aside from the flopping, the Aurus's maneuverability gives it really good momentum so you can really get a clean zoning combo going. Horizontals is a similar sort of story, but you do have to get over an initial speed curve to get it going for a proper horizontal combo. Once you get that momentum going though, the Aurus feels incredible for horizontals. But let's talk about tech. The Aurus is busted for tech. If you're one of those players who hates heavier yo-yos for tech, you may not like it, but the maneuverability and the power give you so much control over this yo-yo, especially with the presence it has and the absence of the rim-weighted sluggishness. And it's not as fatiguing as other yo-yos that weigh as much as the Aurus do. So in short, it's really maneuverable, which makes it pretty good for rail combos. Its natural pacing is a bit below average, but it's not restrictive to the player wanting to pick up the pace. For things like zoning, horizontals, and hop combos, it's a great yo-yo with a lot of power and stability, with the caveat that it's a bit more finicky because of the response bump, and I find that its strongest suit is how it plays for tech. I think the Aurus is a great generalist yo-yo that emphasizes technical play a bit more without the trade-offs that some other tech yo-yos have. some tech yo-yos can kind of sacrifice all avenues of play to emphasize tech more. Just for reference, the particular yo-yo I'm thinking of is the Palp ES, and the Aurus doesn't do that. I enjoy it a lot. And I'm going to move on to the comparisons to the Aurus. For comparisons, I'm going to run the Aurus up against the Klondike and the Savage. And I'm going to start the comparisons with the Klondike. Right away, the main thing that jumped out to me was that the Aurus has a much more forward presence on the string. When doing hops and such, the Aurus has more weight behind it than the Klondike. This makes the Aurus's pacing feel a bit slower than the Klondike's. The Klondike has a more standard pacing as opposed to the Aurus. But I should add, when you A-B the Klondike and the Aurus, as I do for these comparisons, the way the Aurus is paced makes the Klondike's pacing feels way more aggressive and less controlled than it normally feels. But despite the Aurus's slower pacing and heavier presence than the Klondike is way more unpleasant for rail combos than the Aurus. And one small thing, the Klondike's rejections are way easier than the Aurus's. Strings just pop right out of the Klondike's groove as opposed to the Aurus. Finally, binds are a bit tighter and more consistent on the Klondike than the Aurus. In general, I slightly prefer the Aurus over the Klondike. I just prefer the more forward presence and overall aesthetic. Moving on to the Savage. The Savage and the Aurus feel somewhat similar. Not the same, but a bit similar. The Savage has a more standard pacing and can lend itself to being a more immediately aggressive yo-yo, but the Aurus has less of a rim-weighted sensation than the Savage. The Aurus is a bit less fatiguing than the Savage overall because of its less forward of a rim-weighted sensation. I will say the Savage feels less dense than the Aurus, but the two have similar levels of power. As for stability though, the Savage edges out the Aurus because it lacks the big response bump. This makes the Savage a bit less finicky with zontals, zoning, and the like because it's less likely to flop with shaky technique. But the Aurus and the Savage are both maneuverable for their weights, with both being about 68 grams. Overall, the Savage is a bit more of an aggressive playing yo-yo, with it being less tech-suited than the Aurus, with the trade-off being that the Savage is arguably better suited for things like zoning and zontals than the Aurus. Also, the Savage just has better binds than the Aurus, period. Although I enjoy both a lot, I find myself enjoying the Savage more, just by a bit. It's mainly because of the way the Aurus flops. And that rounds off the comparisons. The Aurus is a damn good yo-yo, especially for just $100. It's especially good value with all the goodies it comes with. But the main issue is the shaky stability the Aurus has. Maybe if the response bump was just a little bit smaller, or maybe it's another issue, maybe it just has too much center weight. I can't be certain what the exact problem is, but if it got remedied, this yo-yo could be taken to another level. Don't be confused though, this yo-yo is already insanely good. I put it at around S tier on my tier list. Those of you who peruse my tier list may notice that I said I prefer the Savage over the Aurus, and the Aurus over the Klondike, even though I have the Savage at A tier and the Klondike in S tier. This is because the tier list is based off of more things than my simple preference or performance. I think the Savage appeals to a certain type of person more than others, so I place it lower than something like the Klondike, which may have broader appeal. So even though I prefer the Savage to the Aurus, I have it in A tier while having the Aurus in S tier. Hope that helps. Enjoy Circle made a great yo-yo. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy. Adios.